And here we have Unit 5, Early Republic Foreign Policy. Now in the first part of Unit 5 in lessons 21, 22, 23, we talked about the early republic's domestic policy, meaning how they dealt with issues at home. But in this next couple of lessons, 24 and 25, we're going to talk about how in these first few years the United States worked to make allies and to deal with foreign countries and try to avoid conflicts with them. So we're going to subtitle these lessons, Why Can't We Be Friends? Why Can't We Be Friends? Well, why not indeed? So let's continue here. Okay, our lesson 24, Keeping the Peace. Our text for this lesson, we're looking at events from 1789 to 1909. We're looking at the foreign policies of Presidents Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. How this was affected by Washington's farewell address, and especially we're looking at how the different Federalist and Democratic Republican parties dealt with these foreign countries, and we want to look at the specific leadership qualities of George Washington, among other things. So, the early republic has to deal with its new neighbors. To the west and south, they had Spain. They have Britain to the north and Canada, and in fact, the British still haven't left the Northwest Territory, which is American soil. And then on top of that, they have conflicts in Europe, and especially with their French allies, who again had been our friends during the American Revolution. So if you look at George Washington's thinking here as he's going through the domestic issues here, there simply wasn't enough money to fund a large army and navy, and they had to rely mostly on a national militia. So let's take a look at North America at this time. Again, we've already talked about the borders of the U.S., that it extends out to the Mississippi River, borders the Atlantic Ocean. Here we see its border with British North America. And to the west we see Spain, and also to the southeast because Spain still holds Florida and the Caribbean. So we're going to look at our presidents here, and we're going to address these as a series of issues and solutions. So our first foreign policy president we'll look at here is George Washington from 1789 to 1797. And the main issue of his term is that France, our former ally during the Revolution, has now had its own revolution, the French Revolution, and this has led them to go to war with Great Britain. Now, if you remember, the U.S. had signed a treaty of alliance with France back in 1778. Remember we talked about the Battle of Saratoga and Ben Franklin over in France trying to be our ambassador and convince them to help us? Well, we succeeded, but now we have a treaty with France, and we are unprepared to go into another war. France wants us to join their side against Great Britain. So Washington's question is, would he honor the alliance and fulfill the treaty and support France in its war with Great Britain? So in this case, Washington's solution is to maintain a policy of, first of all, neutrality. That means we remain neutral, that the U.S. would not take either side in this conflict. And secondly, isolationism, which means that we would avoid permanent alliances with foreign powers. And as you see here, the United States wanted to trade with both countries, but did not want to get involved in their fight. And here we have this quote from George Washington's farewell address, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." So basically what Washington chose to do is to break the treaty with France, to withdraw from the treaty, and to stay out of this conflict. Which leads us to the presidency of John Adams from 1797 to 1801. Now, France is unhappy about the U.S.'s choice to withdraw from the treaty, but they hoped that the U.S. would become angry enough over these continued British forts and British soldiers present in the Northwest, and that would lead the U.S. to declare war and join them. However, George Washington had already sent John Jay over to negotiate a treaty with Britain, and the British promised to leave the Ohio Valley without a war. And this made the French angry because they had been hoping that we would join their side. And the French began to attack U.S. ships that were bound for England. So Adams sent 3 representatives over to France to negotiate an end to these attacks. The 3 Americans were met by 3 French representatives of the foreign minister. And in their report, the Americans called these agents X, Y, and Z, which is why this is called the XYZ affair. And they reported back to President Adams that the agents had asked for a tribute, meaning a bribe, in order to end the attacks. Now, when this got to the Americans and to the Federalists, they were angry about this. They were insulted. The phrase they used was millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. And in fact, the Federalist Congress called for war with France. So the question now to Adams, would he do the popular thing in his party, which was to declare war, or would he follow Washington's advice and make peace? Now, the solutions were the Federalist Congress actually authorized increase in naval spending, and they authorized the American Navy to attack French ships. They also passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were intended to stop pro-French critics in America of the Adams administration. So we talked back in one of the previous lessons that we'd explained the Alien and Sedition Acts. It's because the Democratic Republicans who supported the French were very critical of Adams' administration in its conflict with the French here. However, Adams opposed war, and he agreed with Washington that the young country simply was not ready to go to war, so he sent delegates to France and they negotiated a peace treaty. Now, this treaty was very unpopular. It was unpopular with Adams' own Federalists. He had no friends in either party, Federalist or Democratic Republican, and basically this treaty cost Adams the election of 1800. Alexander Hamilton, who had supported war, here you see him saying, "You blew it, John," but Adams' response is, "Lost the election, yes, but saved the country. Totally worth it, Alex." So in Adams' mind, while he had done something that was unpopular, while it had cost him his effort at re-election, he believed that he had done what was in the best interest of the country and saved the United States from a costly war. So let's move to our next president, the first Democratic Republican, Thomas Jefferson, from 1801 to 1809. His issues are that in 1803, the war between Britain and France kicks back up, and this time both sides are attacking American ships going to both countries. And on top of that, the British are actually kidnapping American sailors at sea, which is a practice called impressment. They were said to impress sailors, meaning to capture them and force them to serve in the British Navy. Now, what they said was that the sailors they were capturing were actually British naval deserters, which was true in a few cases, but for the most part, they were kidnapping American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. So the solution, Jefferson tried to negotiate with both France and Britain, but the attacks and the oppressment continued. So Congress passed the Embargo Act of 1807. And the Embargo Act, an embargo, by the way, means that you cut off trade. So the Embargo Act cut off all foreign trade by American ships, essentially saying that if we don't send any ships out to sea, then they won't be able to be attacking us, right? However, the Embargo Act was very unpopular in New England because with no trade, there's no money coming in. It cost jobs and millions of dollars in revenue to the New England states and to American shipping. So Congress repealed this in 1809. Remember, repeal means to take back. And unfortunately, the attacks by Britain and France continued. Now, one famous primary source document to come out of this era is this political cartoon right here. So if you look at it, we see what looks to be a large tortoise which has grabbed a man by the seat of his pants here, and the man is carrying a barrel full of goods. It looks to be carrying it out to a British ship. So what this man is a smuggler who is smuggling goods to Britain in violation of the Embargo Act. So in this case, he's saying, "Oh, you cursed, oh, grab me." So this is the name of this turtle right here. And my question to you is, considering the issue, why do you think the political cartoonist named our turtle friend here, "Oh, grab me"? All right? Think about that for a moment. And that leads us to our lesson 24 thoughts. How do you think George Washington's military experience might have influenced his foreign policy decisions? Number 2, do you think Adams' decision to avoid war with France was an example of civic virtue? And defend your answer. Remember, when we talk about civic virtue means to put the good of others or the country ahead of yourself. And number 3, how did Jefferson attempt to continue the foreign policy principles of the Federalist presidents? When we come back with lesson 25, we'll talk about pirates, war, and so much more, and we'll see you then.